takes on major issues that shape America and the world. He says he sees an erosion of optimism, the cause, collapsing trust in elites and institutions. And he joins Michel Martin with a fascinating look back and also to discuss what lies ahead. Thanks, Christian. Paul Krugman, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be on.
Well, congratulations on this chapter of your very distinguished career. Congratulations on that.
Well, I'm not retiring from the world, but I have retired from the Times, and I'm now free to, I actually do have a newsletter up and running, and I think there'll be plenty to write about in the next few years.
You've written about everything from globalization to financial crises to politics to public trust. How did you decide what you wanted to write about?
It's kind of a what is looking important in people's minds where I think I can add some value. So that's and that can be, and occasionally, there was a period I weighed in on the Iraq War, which was definitely not anything I had expected to be doing, but nobody else was kind of saying the obvious, which was that this was a very, very dubious cause for war, and so I felt I needed to say that. But for the most part, it's whatever comes up. And when the financial crisis came along, I have to say, horrible as it is, that I was actually that was a great time in my life because it was a perfect convergence of my academic work and my popular writing. This was something, in a way, that people like me had been warning could happen, had been ready to talk about, and there it was. And then became the question of, okay, how do you explain that without any technical jargon in 800-word chunks?
I was thinking about a recent column you wrote about tariffs. You wrote how Trump's radical tariff plan could wreck our economy, and you go through all the cons. And then the last line, for people who haven't read it, is, and this is not a spoiler alert, you said, pros, your last line is pros, I can't think of any. And I just wondered if there was ever kind of a feeling of, if I could only have been more persuasive.
I think I'm realistic about that. Times has an immense readership, which means that it probably reaches less than 1% of the U.S. population. Mm-hmm. People's beliefs on many subjects are just not very movable, no matter how good your argument is. I mean, I learned that a long time ago, long before I even wrote for the Times. So it can be frustrating. You can see something, but when we had a debate over Social Security privatization in 2005, I don't know if people even remember that, but that was, George W. Bush, having won re-election, claimed that he had a mandate to privatize Social Security, and I was part of the group of people saying this is a really, really bad idea, and then was absolutely shocked when the push failed, because that was the first policy debate where my side had actually won.
You have been critical equally of initiatives on the Democratic/progressive side, when you thought they were ill-considered and didn't go far enough. And I wondered, is that harder in a way?
That hurt much more. I mean, I was practically tearing my hair out. You can go back and look at what I was writing just before and just after President Obama took office. And I was tearing my hair out over the obviously, it seemed to me, inadequate size of his economic stimulus plans, and even participated in meetings with government officials, and they didn't do it. It hurts much more when you are, I have no illusion that anything I write is ever going to persuade Donald Trump of something, but when you fail to persuade Barack Obama, it hurts more.
So let me go back to when you wrote your final column for the Times. You looked back at your first column, and you talked about the optimism of the early 2000s, and you contrasted it with today's resentment and anger. And just, if you could, for people who haven't read it, why do you think that is? What do you think happened?
I think a large part of it is that the people and institutions that we looked up to just kept failing us. In 2000, if top people in the national security sphere told us that another country had weapons of mass destruction, the idea that they might not be leveling with us, that they might be taking us to war on false pretenses, was inconceivable. I did conceive of it, but I got an amazing amount of pushback from people saying, no, are you really saying that a president of the United States would take us to war for bad reasons? And of course, so it turned out. People thought that people running the financial regulators, economic policymakers, and the bankers themselves knew what they were doing and could be trusted. And then came this, horrific financial crisis, and it turned out that nobody knew what they were doing, and a fair number of people were basically running scams. Down the line, I talk a lot. I talked in the column. It's one of those, do have an international focus, and I spend a lot of time in Europe. Know a lot of Europeans, and the creation of the euro was supposed to be a wonderful event. Supposed to bring Europe together, and in the end, there was a euro crisis, which the currency itself survived barely, but the optimism, the faith in Europe's future did not. And again, this was all of the great and the good were telling Europeans, this is a fantastic idea, trust us. And so, there's accumulation. And I think it's also something that probably should have said in that column is the fact that nobody seems ever to have paid a price. In the 30s, bankers got hauled off to jail. In the aftermath of Iraq, there were plenty of arguments that said that people should, at the very least, be paying some kind of personal price for having misled us into war, and nobody ever did. And I think that does contribute also to the feeling that the system is rigged, that you can't trust the elites.
It's interesting because people used to look back at the Vietnam era, and the 60s, which is a very fractious time, in American life. The violence in the streets, right? Targeted assassinations, millions of dollars in property damage from people just, furiously lashing out, and the Vietnam War. And it became very clear very soon that there were, that false statements were made in connection with that conflict sort of too. But I'm just curious of why you think it is that, in your sense of it, that we kind of, as a country, kind of clawed our way out, but then after the 2000s have not been able to. And I'm just curious why you think that is.
Well, first of all, it did take a while. I mean, if we're thinking of, when did America get over Vietnam syndrome? It probably wouldn't be till the 1980s. But the mystery I find, looking back, is why, in some ways, why elites were as willing to, if not exactly be held accountable, at least to allow the democratic process to work. I mean, there were a lot. Why during the Gilded Age did plutocrats, despite all of their wealth, they didn't actually try to subvert elections? And I'm not sure why there was more restraint on the part of the powerful in the past. But if Watergate, it would barely register as a scandal these days, and I don't know why.